Welcome to the next installment in my video lecture series for international economics. And in this particular video lecture, I'm going to be taking a look at the aggregate demand for money, the supply of money, and how changes in supply and changes in aggregate demand will impact equilibrium exchange rates. So the first thing you should really want to take a look at and have a good understanding is the aggregate demand curve for money. And it's noted here or shown here as this curve L, and it is a function of interest rates and real income. So make sure you understand why this is downward slope, why as interest rates fall, the demand for money increases. And if you think about this, think about it in terms of opportunity cost. If we are at an interest rate of R1, which is higher than R2, there is a higher opportunity cost for holding money balances. So those individuals are foregoing that higher interest rate by holding that money in a form that can be easily spent. So for example, if R1 was equal to, let's say, 15%, individuals would not want to hold on to as much money opposed to if interest rates were at 5%. The reason being that at 15%, you get a much greater return by putting your money in deposits where you get that interest rate. So remember that the demand for money is negatively related to interest rates. At higher levels of interest rates, individuals will not want to hold money in a form that they can be easily spent because they want to take advantage of those higher interest rates. And as interest rates fall, people will want to hold higher money balances because of the fact as interest rates start to fall, then the opportunity cost of holding real money balances decreases. So make sure you're comfortable with the fact of why the aggregate demand curve for money is downward sloping with respect to interest rates. Also realize that the real aggregate demand for money is also a function of income. And this is a positive relationship. So we're starting with an original real aggregate demand for money. And we have an interest rate 1, and Q1 represents how much people want to hold in money balances at that interest rate. If there was an increase in real income, that is income irrespective of prices, this would cause the aggregate demand curve to shift to the right. So let me draw that in there for you. Let me put that there. So a rise in real income causes the aggregate demand curve to shift to the right. And let me change this to signify that this is the second aggregate demand curve and that it is shifted due to the fact that income has increased. So why is this representation of aggregate demand for money when income increases? Because if you think about this, if we keep the interest rate constant, what is going to happen as income goes up? People will want to hold more money balances. So that is represented by the fact that the aggregate demand curve has shifted to the right. And let me make that a dotted line. And let me actually put a point there. Let me make it the same size as the other one also. So when the interest rate stays the same, when we have an increase in income, aggregate demand increases. Why do people want to hold higher levels of money balances? Well, if you think about this, generally when people make more money, they want to spend more. So they're going to want to hold money in the form of balances that could be easily used to purchase more goods and services. So this could be represented by the aggregate demand curve shifting to the right because at that same interest rate R1, At the original income levels, people only wanted to only wanted to hold Q1 in liquid assets in order to facilitate purchases. And then when income goes up, we see that their demand for money balances that they can use to purchase goods and services increases from Q1 to Q2. Now let's take a look at this, and we'll look at the aggregate demand for money and the aggregate supply of money together. So here we're going to have the real money supply and the real demand for money, the real aggregate demand for money. So where they intersect one another is going to be our equilibrium interest rate and the equilibrium quantity of money in the money markets. Now realize that we have the real money supply as vertical because we are assuming that the Fed is controlling the money supply or has some control of the money supply, and they are targeting a specific real supply of money in order to facilitate exchanges in the economy. So realize that where the money supply curve intersects money demand, that is going to give us the equilibrium interest rate and the equilibrium quantity of money in money markets. Let's take a look at what would occur if we were to have an interest rate above that. So let's say we are at R2. If we follow R2, the first thing that we hit is the aggregate demand, real demand for money. So if we go from that point straight down, that tells us at that interest rate, that's the amount of money balances that individuals want to hold. This is much less than the supply of money. So the supply of money at that interest rate is much greater than the demand for money at that interest rate. So in essence, we have a surplus of money in the money markets. And just like any good, if we have a surplus of money, what we expect to see is that the price will fall. So if we think of the interest rate as the price of borrowing money, that if we have a surplus of money in the money markets, that interest rates will start to fall. And these interest rates will migrate downward until the aggregate, the demand for money is going to equal to the supply of money. Same thing holds if we have an interest rate that is below the equilibrium interest rate. If we follow that over to aggregate demand, at that low interest rate, people want to hold higher money balances than are available. Here is the supply of money balances, Q1, that's the money supply. At that low interest rate, people want to demand much more money in the form of money balances that they could use to purchase things than is actually being supplied. So we have a shortage of money here. The quantity demanded is greater than the quantity supplied. And when there's a shortage, as with any other good, we can see that what will happen is have a tendency to migrate upward. So interest rates will migrate upward when they're below the equilibrium interest rate until the demand for money and the supply for money are equal to one another. So make sure you're comfortable with that, what determines the equilibrium interest rate and what forces that are out there in the money markets that if interest rates are above or below that, that we would move towards the equilibrium just like any other market. So let's take a look at what's going to be the impact if we increase the money supply. All right, so we have our demand for real money balances, the real demand for money here, our downward sloping line that is in red. And we have our money supply, the real money supply, which is M1 divided by P. And where they intersect one another, that gives us the equilibrium interest rate. So if there's an increase in the money supply curve will shift to the right. So what I can do is I can cheat a little bit here. I can copy and paste and then move this over to here. So this represents an increase in the money supply, and let me change this to M2 to signify that this is the new money supply. So interest rate, the new equilibrium will be where the new money supply curve intersects the original money demand curve. So if we connect that point there and move to the left, that will give us our new equilibrium interest rate. And again, I'm just going to cheat a little bit here. Copy and paste and then change this to an R2. All right. Now, why would the interest rates migrate downward? So if we were this is our original equilibrium point, right? We are at R1 at that original real money supply. And let me actually highlight the point too to make it a little easier to see. That's our original equilibrium. Now we have seen that the money supply curve is shifting to the right. So let me actually draw that in so you can see that there is an increase in the money supply right there. So here's our original equilibrium where money demand and money supply are equal to one another. We then see that the money supply curve shifts to M2 over P, and we get a new equilibrium of R2. But how does this actually adjust to that? Well, if the interest rates don't adjust instantaneously, what do we end up seeing? We end up seeing that distance right there, and let me actually change it to another color. That pink color right there, that is the surplus of money that exists in the marketplace. So when those money supply increases in real terms, there's no change in the price, we are at R1, so the supply of money is greater than the demand of money. We have a surplus in the marketplace, and this is going to drive interest rates downward. Because we have a surplus in the marketplace, and let me change the color of that. So as the surplus exists, what happens? There's a surplus of money out there. Interest rates are going to have to fall. This will increase the quantity of money that people want to hold, and interest rates will fall until we get to R2, and that is where the real demand for money is equal to the real supply of money. So make sure you're comfortable with that, how a change in the money supply impacts interest rates. So if we increase the money supply, interest rates would fall. And if we were to do the opposite, if we were to decrease the money supply, interest rates would increase. Further, we want to take a look at what happens if real income increases. And I should have deleted that out there. So here we are at our original equilibrium. We have the supply of money, the real supply of money, intersects the real demand for money, and that gives us the equilibrium interest rate. As we showed in a previous slide, that if there's a rise in income, in real income, this causes the demand for money curve to shift to the right. So let me draw that in for you here. So the demand for money shifts, the real demand for money shifts to the right. And let me change this to L2 to signify that this is at a higher level. All right. So what will happen is that we will have a new equilibrium point. We will have an equilibrium point where the new aggregate demand curve intersects the original real supply of money. So this will be R2, and again, I'm going to do a little cheating here and copying and pasting and changing the notation on it. That is R2. So we will see an increase in the interest rate if real income increases. So let me put the little arrow there so you can see that. And let's take a look at the adjustment mechanism. Let's hold R1 constant even though the demand for money increased. So at that R1, if it doesn't instantaneously adjust, what occurs is that the demand for money is much greater than the supply of money. So because of this, we have a shortage of money in the marketplace. So whenever there's a shortage for any product at R1, the price is going to increase. And since the price of borrowing money is R, what will happen is we will start to see interest rates rise. And as interest rates rise, the amount of money that people want to hold will decrease, and interest rates will continue migrating upward to R2 until the real demand for money and the real supply for money are equal to one another.